Good morning, everyone. I'm Tanya Brewster. I am the Vice President of Marketing, Communications, and Guest Operations at the Chicago Children's Museum. And we want to thank you for joining us for this webinar, Building a Parent Nation. Here at CCM, we strongly believe in providing support, resources, and the building blocks to uplift parents as they navigate parenthood and guide their littles through childhood. And this is the type of support is very important, and not only inside our museum walls, but throughout our communities. In our community, we think it's essential to facilitate these types of discussions to bring a brighter future for our children and the next generation. CCM centers play, learning, childhood, and fun at the forefront of everything we do. And our CCM friend, Dr. Dana Suskind's goal of guiding us toward a future in which every child has the opportunity to fulfill their potential aligns with CCM's mission to improve children's lives by creating a community where play and learning connect. That's why I'm so happy to introduce Dr. Dana Suskind and Yuri Flores. Dr. Dana Suskind is a professor of surgery and pediatrics at the University of Chicago and a co-director of the TMW Center for Early Learning and Public Health. Dr. Suskind is an international recognized thought leader and an author of Parent Nation, Unlocking Every Child's Potential, Fulfilling Society's Promise, a book that has just entered the New York Times book list this past Sunday. And so big cheers to that. This book aims to empower parents to use developmental neuroscience to build society that works for families, not against them. Yuri Flores is campaign director for Parent Nation, and she leads the strategic effort to activate parents and allies in building a parent nation. Prior to joining the TMW Center, Yuri supported a network of campaign for grade level reading communities and its effort to ensure every early school success for children by elevating parent success. So with no further ado, I'd like to introduce Yuri and Dana Suskind.
Thank you so much. Speaking to the CCM family, it feels like speaking to family. So it is awesome to be back. I only wish that we could be in person, but thank you, Tanya. Annie and Lewis, who I know helped make it all happen, but even remotely, I am thrilled to share a bit about what we're doing around building a parent nation. And I'm thrilled to be with my partner, Yuri Flores, who will be sharing a lot of our work. But I wanted to, set the stage for those of you all who don't know a little bit about myself and my journey and the work that goes back probably a decade. So much partnership and really collaboration with CCM and all of you all. So I'm really happy to be here. But I want to just contextualize things. As many of you all know, it's important to remember that I'm actually a surgeon. It is, the operating room rather than Zoom or the social sciences is my natural habitat. But my work as a pediatric cochlear implant surgeon really has shaped so much of my thinking and my work going forward. Because as you all know, as a physician, and a cochlear implant surgeon, I work just millimeters from the brain, and I have no room for error. When I step into that operating room, it's critical that I have my necessary tools at my disposal, and more importantly, my A-team. Otherwise, my job is impossible. And I'm going to explain why this is so important to this whole story. Now, it may sound like a little bit of like a stretch, but the challenges of successfully rearing children is really not so different. I'd even suggest that raising a child is a bit more complicated than doing surgery. To raise a child into a happy, healthy adult capable of achieving their full potentials, you need adequate information and you need appropriate and safe environment, and you need backup. But far too many parents are not operating or really parenting in an optimal environment. For far too many parents in this country and throughout the world, it's as if they're operating in the midst of an endless power outage, asked to achieve a critical goal without necessary tools or any backup. And it is really just not sustainable. But so how did I get to this point that we're talking about what families need? After all, I am just a surgeon. But let me take a step back and really share my journey, which I think will make clear why it is that I'm here today. I became a pediatric cochlear implant surgeon because I thought I could change lives one child at a time. By implanting children born deaf, I give them access to sound, to hearing, and spoken language. But early on in my practice, I started noticing profound differences in my patients' outcomes. Some of the children excelled developmentally, others not at all. Some learned to talk, others did not. The ability to hear, it turned out, didn't always unlock their full capacity to learn and thrive intellectually. It was a very painful difference to observe. And compelled to understand the origins of these differences, and importantly, how I could best help my patients, I began to take a journey far outside the operating room into the world of social sciences. I was initially inspired by research that really found a stark difference in the amount of language, the actual number of words that children were exposed to early in life. Researchers calculated that by the time children reached their 4th birthday, there was a difference of roughly 30 million words between those who heard a lot of language and those who heard very little. As I learned more, I realized that what I was seeing in my deaf patients really just mirrored the population at large, that in all children, the differences in early language exposure correlates with later differences in achievement. Some of my patients were receiving that necessary, essential experience with language, others were not. Now, to be clear, the research that inspired me wasn't perfect, far from it, and we could spend hours talking about it, but it was persuasive enough to pull me, a surgeon, from the operating room. It gave me a critical place to start. I really just think of that 30 million word study as a first sentence in what has become an extensive body of literature, a body of literature that includes cutting edge research that reveals the many ways in which language input stimulates every part of an infant's brain. And the fact that quantity of words is far from the only input. Quality and delivery are tremendously important. Nurturing back and forth conversation with a loving caregiver are especially effective at building secure neuronal foundation that will serve a child throughout a lifetime. So for me in 2010, when I launched the 30 Million Words Initiative, now the TMW Center for Early Learning and Public Health, my primary goal was to help ensure the healthy brain development for all children and give the ability to all children to reach their potential intellectually and emotionally. Brain science pointed the way. Everything that we designed and did was based on the fact that nurturing talk and interaction between caregivers and infants lay the foundation for brain development. It is and always has been about the power of parents and caregivers. And I know this to be similarly true with CCM from both our collaborations and being an avid consumer of it. For us, my team and I developed evidence-based programs and strategies that showed parents the impact of talking to babies and young children. Those strategies became the theme of TMW. Tune in, talk more, take turns, or what we call the 3 Ts. But of course, despite the fact that the 3 Ts, many people sort of interpreted them as a silver bullet for everything. We know that in this world, there are no silver bullets. With that being said, I was proud and still am to share the 3 Ts with many families through the TMW programs, through work across the country, and through my first book, 30 Million Words, Building a Child's Brain. My colleagues and I at the center conducted numerous rigorous studies of our programs. We found that indeed our strategies worked and the science that supports them is solid. The programs we promote can and often do improve the lives of children. But in truth, as our research programs took us into more and more families' homes and into their lives, I realized just how much was being asked of parents. Parents everywhere were being asked to operate without their A-team. Because our studies followed children from the first day of life into kindergarten, my team and I were getting to know families up close and over time. Parents' enthusiasm was thrilling, as many of you all know. They embraced the 3 Ts with gusto, tuning into their children, talking more as they went about their daily lives. and taking turn, encouraging their children to participate in conversation from day one. They wanted what all parents want, to help their children get off to the best possible start. The problem was that the 3 T's only took parents so far. Real life would intrude again and again and again. There were so many families across Chicagoland. I'm sure many of who have come to CCM with their own children, but some examples included Randy, who loved the fact that his love of baseball could help his son learn math, but had to work 2 jobs, and most days had less than 30 minutes with his own kids. There was Sabrina, who gave up a well-paying job to care for her husband when he got sick, and whose family ended up spending over 2 years in a homeless shelter, where she raised her 2 young children, the youngest still a baby, in a stressful and chaotic environment. There was Michael and Kiana, whose life was upended when he was arrested for a crime he did not commit, and sat in jail for over 5 years, awaiting trial that quickly exonerated him. Everywhere I looked, I saw hurdles looming in front of mothers and fathers. I realized that with both sadness and resolve, that our programs can share with parents the knowledge and powerful skills that build their children's brains, but our programs don't substantially change the day-to-day lives of parents who participate. The larger realities of a family circumstance, the work constraints, economic stressors, bad luck, and injustices they're subject to, all matter as much as the 3 T's for healthy brain development. They either allow for the brain building power of talk and interaction to occur, or if they limit the opportunities for engaging in the 3 T's, they stifle it like a weed choking off the growth of a garden. Reflecting on what I was seeing, I began to look beyond my patients and the predominantly low-income families who were participating in the TMW programs to the entirety of tens of millions of parents in the United States who have children. And I saw how, regardless of income level, far too many parents are being sidelined to some degree by our country's unfamily-friendly policies. This is not to minimize the Herculean struggles of poor families or to suggest that more affluent families face equivalent challenges. There is no equivalency, but nonetheless, it remains true that American society has abdicated its role and responsibility for supporting all families. This reality, of course, as we all know, became painfully apparent during COVID-19, which left families reeling, millions forced to scrape by with no backup whatsoever. The pandemic was like a powerful earthquake with lingering aftershocks that showed us just how shaky our nation's infrastructure of support for parents and therefore children really was and still is. The bottom line is we've made it difficult for all parents to raise children in this country and almost impossible for some. Now I'm going to share some of these stats. Many of you all likely already know it. In the United States, we are literally the only one of 38 OECD countries not to mandate paid parental leave. Look, I think many of us intuitively understand how challenging it is from a parent perspective, but new research from Natalie Brito and her colleagues at NYU shines a light on what it means for kids too. The study indicates that among infants whose parents have 3 months of paid leave experience more advanced neurologic development than mothers who had only access to unpaid leave during that time. And in exploring why this was, it really looks like it works through the impact of parents' mental health and the stress level that so many parents have. We know that we spend less on early child care and education than any other developed nation. This slide, this data point shows it all so well, which has resulted in a fragmented, not consistently high quality child care system. We know that, this slide shows how much we invest in childcare. And, we know about the Scandinavian countries, 29,000 per year per child. But even not looking at the high performance, even looking at the average of developed nations, which is about 14,000 a year, we don't even compare with our investment of $500 per child per year. We are just such an outlier. And this results in approximately half of Americans living in so-called childcare deserts, and only 10% of existing programs being designed with developmental science in mind. The rest, 90%, are varying quality. And this has resulted in American families, having a real difficult time in providing high quality childcare if needing to go to work. And we know from this recent resignation with mothers leading the way that it has become an unsustainable scenario. You can't force parents to choose between the care of their children and going to work. But there is another not so surprising result from the U.S. Lack of investment.
Crying about your dog.
I'm sorry? Oh,
sorry.
No worries. So where was I? So the result is that this has not only resulted in the lack of support, but another important data point, parental happiness. Look, in most advanced nations, parents are less happy than non-parents. It's hard to raise children. But in a study of 22 developed nations by Jennifer Glass and colleague, she found a relationship between how family-friendly the policies were of the nation. And she found that in countries with more family-friendly policies, there was a smaller difference, a smaller gap between parental happiness and those who are non-parents. But in our country, as you can see at the bottom of the slide, we have the largest non-parental happiness gap. Long and short of it, parents in our country, because of the lack of family-friendly policies, are profoundly more unhappy than any other nation. Put it simply, parents in this country lack support and they lack choices. No matter their political or religious orientation, employment or educational status, too many parents seem to be struggling. So for me, as I reflected on all of this and I began writing my next book, I knew that the world didn't need another how-to book about what parents can do. There are many wonderful books, and that's probably the origin of my first book. But I thought instead, maybe a book that shows how the brain science can inform a society that works for parents, not against them, could help shift the narrative and the burdens that so many parents carry. I named this book Parent Nation, but I should really be clear that when I say parents, I'm not just referring to biologic parents. But I'm referring to any loving caregivers, mom, dad, step-parents, adoptive parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, really anyone who loves a child. And as I started writing this book, I spoke to dozens of parents from all walks of life. And I was struck time and time again by how much they shared in common. Even parents who seemed to have nothing in common on the surface told me stories and shared thoughts, concerns, and fears that were incredibly similar to one another. Though their circumstances differed wildly, the fact that they were struggling to parent in the way they wanted, in the way they knew best for their children, that was universal. And I think we are seeing this across the country. We are being convinced that, that parents are we are being convinced that the way it is okay. And we know it's not, no matter what the orientation of parents are to raising their children. I listened to one mother, Jade, who is deeply religious and believes that a mother's place is in the home. And as she explained to me through tears that the lack of health insurance and inadequate family income sent her back to Starbucks after her children were born, in spite of her dreams of staying home. That, juxtaposed to another mom, Talia, who had 2 babies while earning a PhD in psychology, but gave up a a promising postdoctoral position where it became untenable to manage the demands of jobs and 2 children under 4. The economics for paying for childcare no longer seemed to make sense, and Talia felt, in her own words, that she was failing in all parts of her life. And unlike Jade, she hoped to work outside the home, but could not. You know, we talk a lot about parental choice in this country. It's considered sacrosanct, as it should be. But really, what does choice mean when there are no options to be had? Jade didn't feel like she had a choice. Talia didn't feel like she had a choice, and neither do millions of parents around the country. You know, and you may ask, how did we end up in this place that we are today, with a status quo that leaves parents absolutely struggling and unhappy, a status quo that is totally devoid of systemic approaches to help families meet their developmental needs? You know, the explanation is complex and multifaceted, but one consistent theme that runs throughout the choices we've made as a society is this mythic idea of American individualism. This, you know, notion that Americans have to be tough and independent prevails, and it perpetuates this going it alone as a virtuous ideal. The result has been to convince parents that they should be able to shoulder the enormous responsibility of early child care, development, and education on their own without support. You know, as parents, we, especially mothers, have internalized this propaganda, often burdened by guilt. You know, many are managing a delicate balancing act, struggling to make it work, yet feeling totally inadequate and unable to live up to the ideals we imagine we should achieve. Asking, you know, why, like Talia said, why are we failing? You know, rather than asking, why has the system failed us? The bottom line is that we have no expectations that society should play a role. Indeed, expecting societal support is seen as a form of weakness, an admission of failure. So we suffer alone, but we suffer collectively as well. When the ultimate intellectual development of a child is hampered, we all lose. And this brings me back to my origins, because fortunately, I believe that neuroscience can give us a roadmap. Just as it tells us what to prioritize individually as parents, it can show us where to go societally as well. It can lay out the coordinates that will lead us towards healthy brain development for all children. The goal, laying the foundation for optimal brain development, should be our constant guide. And what does neuroscience says? Neuroscience tells us that we must begin when learning begins, as CCM so beautifully lays out, not on the first day of school, but the first day of life. It tells us that children's earliest and most impactful brain architects are their parents and caregivers. And it tells us that environment matters. Stable, calm environment fosters socio-emotional and executive function skills, whereas disruptive environment impedes its development. And what do parents and caregivers need in order to follow the roadmap provided by neuroscience? Loving mothers and fathers don't need PhDs. They don't need expensive gadgets to do an excellent job at supporting their children's early brain development. They need access to basic but critical knowledge about how to best foster their critical neural connections. They need access to CCM and places in which they can do this. They need time with their children to put that knowledge into practice and nurture those connections. They need high quality childcare to complement those efforts. And they need to provide children with stress-free homes. And critically, they need support from this endeavor from employers, from healthcare, from communities, and policymakers. But what does this mean in practice? What should we strive for? Things like paid leave that allow children to have, that allows parents critical time with their children. They need a comprehensive, high-quality childcare. Child credit that addresses the child poverty rate, and a holistic approach to prenatal and pediatric care that includes information about brain development. They need the private sector that institutes family-friendly policies that that are also good for the bottom line. In other words, we need a society that puts children and families at the center. But how can we create a society that truly puts parents and children parents and families at the center? You know, I always say that in this country, we've got the science, we've got the economic case. What we lack is the public and political will. But there is a bright spot. We need to look no further than our nation's own recent past to see how a group of formerly isolated individuals can band together to achieve important and lasting change. In the mid-20th century, Americans over 65 were the poorest, most underserved segment of the US population. As many of you all know, today it's children under 5 and their parents who are the poorest, most and underserved. But back then it was the elderly. And in addition to having limited retirement, older Americans were facing crippling healthcare and housing costs. According to a government study at that time, 50% of the elderly existed below the minimum standards of decency. The AARP changed all of that. Thanks to the AARP efforts over the last 50 years, there's no age group better served by society and government than the elderly. The poverty rate among Americans age 65 has declined by 70%. For children under 5, it's now increased since we've stopped the child credit. The AARP continues to make advances in healthcare, prescription drug support, long-term care, and more. They unite constituents across socioeconomic, political, racial, and ethnic divides by focusing on the rights that benefits everyone, and their success is legendary. And just as our nation's seniors were in desperate need and entirely deserving of support, so too are parents of young children and children themselves. We need more and we should demand more of society. But where do we start? How do we move forward? As important as we fight is how we go about fighting as a united front of parents and allies working together who recognize themselves in one another and who refuse the very notion that children can be someone else's, which is why my team and I are launching a major coordinated campaign to help spread these ideas far and wide and to help bring them to life. It's my hope that this campaign, in conjunction with the book, will help shift the public will in favor of championing families and giving all children an opportunity to thrive. And it's really at this point that I want to turn over the slides and the platform to my amazing partner, Yuri Flores, because books and ideas are one thing, but really change comes from all of us working together. CCM and all the partner organizations are an important light, and the families that we work with and they work with are critical in moving our country forward, so that we speak with a united voice. And at this point, I'd like to turn it over to my wonderful partner, Yuri Flores.
Thank you, Dana, and good morning. It's such a pleasure and an honor to be with you, Tanya. Thank you for inviting me to join Dana and in sharing with you the work of Parent Nation. You've just heard Dana speak about her inspiration for writing the book, the frame around the science, and why the time now is so critical, maybe more than ever, to really bring about the change that we're talking about, to make real in this country that society centers children and families in all of what it does, in its investments, in its policies, and in its support all the way around. So I'm going to pick up where Dana left off. I'm going to share a few slides to really talk about the platform for change that we have developed and which we have launched along with the book just a couple of weeks ago. April 26th seems like just yesterday. But that was the day the book came out and that we launched this platform for change. And I want to share it with you and hopefully have all of you join us in this campaign, but also spread the word and share with others this important work and how others can get involved. So first, let me just talk about the social impact campaign portion. And really, this is the work that that is helping us amplify the messages around the importance of supporting parents, especially in the very early years. The social impact campaign started with really elevating some very specific key messages, and I'm going to share 3 of them with you. They're very, very short videos. But we wanted to kick off the campaign, which, as I said, we did a week and a half or 2 ago, elevating what we know is possible and what we have seen in the media periodically be shared with the public as unusual moments, but moments that we ought to all agree should be the norm and not unusual moments. That's phase 1 of the social impact campaign. We're moving slowly into phase 2, which is really engaging and inviting parents to share their real life stories and having us elevate those stories through our newsletter, in our website, and in other ways through social media. We will be amplifying those voices to continue to make the case that parents deserve a society that supports them so that all children can succeed. Let me share with you 3 of the videos that are helping us really push out this message. Each one of the videos are very short, talks about some of the key elements that are important in the life of a parent and the child, whether it's the issue of time or the issue of secure and stable housing, or making sure that parents have the flexibility in the workplace to be with their children in very important moments. So I'm going to have Paige show you the videos, and we can go to the first one, Paige. Great.
Did you understand it though? No. Okay.
What our nation has, lots of devoted parents. What our nation needs, better ways to support them. Like paid leave for the early days that go too fast. The potential of children depends on support for their parents. It takes a nation, a parent nation.
Really? I thought the same thing. We think a lot alike, huh?
Oh my God, they're adorable. So brave.
They are, aren't they?
I'm learning how to spell, and I think I do it right.
What our nation has, lots of devoted parents. What our nation needs, better ways to support them. Like flexible work schedules for moments you can't redo. The potential of children depends on support for their parents. It takes a nation, a parent nation.
Do you like your new room?
What our nation has, lots of devoted parents. What our nation needs, better ways to support them. Like affordable housing for the security kids need. The potential of children depends on support for their parents. It takes a nation, a parent nation.
Thank you, Paige. So again, these are moments that some of us may actually recall seeing some of these videos in social media and in other ways over the past year, 2 years. And what struck us about these videos is that they were news videos that were lifted up as, isn't this sweet, isn't this unique? And again, our point here is that it should not be unique. It should be the norm for all parents that this is available, whether it's, as you saw, time that parents need with their children, especially in the very earliest years, or the kind of flexible benefits that allow parents to be with their kids in those special moments, or housing, and many other supports that parents need. So in addition, the campaign will and is lifting up some of the pain points. So not just the special moments that we know are beautiful and important, but we also need to lift up for the public that, and Dana talked about this in her remarks and pulled up some very powerful slides with data, that things are not okay in the society as it relates to the conditions and the environment in which parents have to raise their children. Whether it's the lack of affordable childcare, whether it's childcare deserts, whether it's very, very few of any parent has paid parental time, sufficient paid parental time leave to be with their children. So making sure that the public is aware that we've got to overcome these conditions and really create environments for parents to succeed is the central message of the social impact campaign. So let me move on now to what we're calling our ground game. Again, this is also part of our platform for change. And if you move to the next slide page, I want to share with you some of the key elements of the community activation campaign. In other words, what are our strategies to activate parents and caregivers and allies, the public, hopefully getting out of our echo chamber to fight for the change that we're calling for, to fight for a parent nation. So in the back of the book, if you haven't yet read the book, or if you haven't even ordered the book, we encourage you to do that. But in the back of the book, Dana included a book discussion guide so that if you're interested in having a book circle, a book club, ways of bringing people together to not only read the book, but to really delve in to the key messages in the book, some of the experiences that parents share, that Dana shares from parents in the book. It's quite a very helpful discussion guide, and it's available on our website for anyone who would like to download it. In addition, in the back of the book is an action guide. So I don't know how many of you have read a book and it's a call to action, and then you sit back saying, so what can I do about this? So we included an action guide at the back of the book that has a number of recommendations, ideas, suggestions for how you can get involved in helping to advocate and push for a parent nation. And then we wanted to get as close to the ground as possible in working with parents. And so we have developed a parent activation toolkit. I'm going to walk you through that in just a moment, via what we're calling parent villages. And what we're attempting to do, and again, we just launched this, we're excited that we've had such a great response. But the parent villages really is a way of bringing parents together in community to fight for change. So I'm going to walk you through what that looks like. You see just here on this slide under the parent villages column, an English and a Spanish version. And that's because everything that we have created, this parent activation toolkit, is as a starting point in these two languages, English and Spanish. But if we go to the next slide, I can actually begin to walk you through what the parent villages are intended to be and what our aspirations are. So again, the idea here is for people around the country, partners, organizations, community groups, individual people who care about this issue to bring together in community, small groups of parents, and really to create a space to honor parents, where parents can give and share support with each other. And importantly, to begin to explore, Dana touched on this earlier, that what we have today in the society, that it doesn't have to be this way. We can actually change the conditions in society in a way that we can see the supports that parents deserve and need. But first, we have to begin to elevate our own expectations of society, and to know that society has an obligation to invest in the next generation, to partner with parents and families in raising the next generation. And then at the end of the day, the parent village is really about helping to inspire parents to activate their power and to fight for change. Just like there are the 3 T's, we have the 3 F's under parent villages. So the idea of parent villages, with all of what I just shared, is to foster community, to forge collective identity. And what we mean by that is that parents we'll be able to see that all parents have so much in common. You might be from different political parties, you might be different socioeconomic incomes, you might be different ethnic groups, but at the end of the day, every parent loves their child. Almost every single parent is struggling and every parent needs support. And by forging collective identity, we know that we can build the political power or the advocacy power, the movement power to make change. And then again, last outcome for the parent villages is to be inspired to fight for change. So how does that work? Well, we've created a toolkit, as I shared with you, and you'll see that in the next slide. That toolkit was parent informed and parent tested. We spent almost a year in development, talking with parents, listening to parents, but also talking and listening to parent organizational leaders in the parent education, parent leadership, parent home visiting, parent advocacy space, and really honing this toolkit and the curriculum that I'll share with you in a second to make sure that it really did honor parents and that it met our three objectives of fostering community, forging collective identity, and then being inspired to fight for change. The toolkit includes 4 session guides. They're scripted, so you don't have to invent anything. We've developed it by all the input that we've listened to, by doing the research, by aligning to the neuroscience, and they're scripted, but very adaptable. We'll talk about that in a minute. The curriculum itself has high impact activities for parents to learn and to be really thoroughly engaged. It includes parent handouts, facilitation guides, and tips. As I said earlier, it's available in English and in Spanish. And given our new reality, it's not only for bringing parents together in person, but also virtually, or in other words, remotely. It's a very interactive and very engaging curriculum. It's adaptable and modular. And what do I mean by that? So the toolkit and the curriculum itself, as I said, is scripted. We've got a structured agenda with activities and discussion questions. And most of that, we would love it for the host to keep intact, but you can change the way in which you deliver the curriculum so that it honors the unique culture, language, traditions of the parents that you bring together. Or if you look at all 4 sessions and maybe you're an organization, maybe the museum is bringing parents together and really just likes what's in session 2 because it's part of what you've been trying to talk about with parents, you could just take session 2. Or if you want to include all 4 sessions as an add-on to another curriculum that you have, you can do that as well. The content is available on our website via download at no cost. It's not about anything except driving and fueling a movement. And then finally, for any organization that already works with parents and has a presence in community, we invite you to co-brand, add your organization's logo, so that as you promote this idea of parent villages, parents know who it's coming from. It's a trusted messenger if they've been part of your organization. So that's sort of the background. Let me talk a little bit about what's in each of the 4 sessions, and you'll see that it aligns to the 3 Fs. We actually added a 4th F because there's 4 sessions, and you'll see that in a minute when we get to the next slide, but let me stay on this slide for a second. In session 1, so again, you've done some outreach, parents have come together. We recommend 8 to 10 parents in each of these villages. Of course, it is, as I said, adaptable. So if you wanted to expand it and you have the ability to have more than one facilitator, the idea though is to keep it small so that all parents have an opportunity to share and to be heard and to exchange ideas, etc. So in this first session, because it is the first one, we're really introducing to the group the idea of a parent nation and beginning to drop these seeds that parents deserve support. And we do that intentionally because in this country, as Dana shared earlier, oftentimes parents don't believe that there's anybody to help them, that they deserve anything. It's all on them. The responsibility is all on their shoulders. And we want them to know that it doesn't have to be this way, that there's actually a responsibility here that society has in investing in the next generation. So we'll introduce them. There's a very short 3-minute video on Parent Nation. The parents will begin to meet each other, learn and hear from each other. They'll talk about their hopes and dreams for their children. And then so that we ground the group, the one activity in session one, which is about half of the time. These are, by the way, 90-minute sessions. They will begin to ground themselves as a group by exploring what we call the foundational, Parent Nation foundational principles. These are a set of principles that really either resonated with parents or that parents helped to inform. There are 6 principles that really honor all parents and that help parents begin to imagine a society that better supports them. If we have time, we can go deeper into each of these sessions and or if you have questions. So then we move into session 2. And if you're the host, if you're the facilitator, you, by working with parents and really understanding their time limitations, their availability, you can choose to have these every week, every other week. Really, it's up to you and the parent group. So when you come back for session 2, in this session, parents begin to deepen their understanding of the challenges that they face and that other parents in their group face by reflecting on the gaps in the existing support systems. What we found when we talked to parents and when we tested a lot of our ideas here, and I'll come back to that a little bit later, and by looking, by the way, at the research and through focus groups that have been done in this country and other countries, parents not only oftentimes in this country not have a higher expectations of their society, but they're sometimes and often not cognizant of just how much is on their shoulders. They're overwhelmed, they're exhausted, often feeling guilty that they're not doing enough. And so they're sort of aware of all of that, but they're not deeply understanding just how out of balance things are. So in session 2, we introduced 2 activities to really kind of get to this kind of reflection that we wanted parents to have. The first one is through the building blocks activity. And in this activity, it's a set of cards. Parents will begin to dig into some scenarios, very common scenarios that most parents in this country can relate to. One of them, for example, is, your boss has asked you to work more hours, but your childcare, you've got to pick up your child by 5 or 6, but now you've got to stay until 8 o'clock. How does a parent manage that? Well, through these building block cards, parents begin to imagine what it could be like if your state had supports for you, the federal government had supports for you, community groups had support for you, your employers had flexible benefits. And so they begin to start thinking outside of the box a bit about how these scenarios could be addressed if you had support. And then in the second part of the session 2 activity, or the second activity in session 2, is what we call the big shift. The big shift, actually, you can also do the big shift yourself on the Parent Nation website. It's the moment where parents have probably one of the biggest aha moments in this experience of parent villages. And what's happening with the big shift is parents are looking at a big poster with a scale, a balance. And they've got sticky notes, they're writing their top 5 needs that they have or had when their children were little, and who met those needs in real life. Was it you as an individual? That's on one side of the scale. You had to rely on friends, family, neighbors, pay out of pocket, or did that need get taken care of by an institution, society, etc.? And so they'll post their post-its of these high impact needs that they have in raising their children or had in those very early years. And then they'll do the activity again with the same needs on a new poster called My Ideal Society poster. And parents begin to then see the difference. We have an image, I don't know if it's in this slide, and I won't show it to you right now, but Paige can bring it up a little bit later, where we see exactly where these Post-it notes fall time and time again when we've tested this. And now that people are starting to host parent villages, we're starting to imagine what we will see with these. But the visual reality, the visual experience rather of what happens is that parents see how out of balance, very experientially, see how out of balance these scales are in their real life, and how much more balanced they begin to imagine it in their ideal reality, in their ideal society, which is this big shift idea that we have. And it really gets to trying to shift mindsets, to shift expectations for parents. And in almost every time that we have tested this and seen parents go through it, we see parents begin to realize it doesn't have to be this way. We can actually create a different society. But then parents leave session 2 saying, so how? What do we do? How did we make that happen? So on the next slide, I'll talk about session 3, and that begins to answer that question. And session 3 is where parents begin to find their voice. And what we do in session 3 is we introduce this idea of a change maker and what it means to be a change maker in creating social change in any society. And we introduce the typical social change roles that are often talked about in the literature. They're the helper, the advocate, the organizer, the rebel. Those are the typical social change roles identified in the literature. And then we added storyteller, because we know that that is very, very powerful in terms of making social change. So what happens in this activity is parents begin to learn about these roles by hearing the host or the facilitator go through a set of activities. Each activity is aligned to one of these roles. The parents don't know that yet. But if they respond and see themselves in doing that activity, say it's hosting an information session on an issue you care about at your home and inviting people to come and talk about that. If that's something that they really feel they have the talent, interest, strength, then they'll pick the color card associated with that role. Or if it's something about blogging or posting a video, that would be associated with the storyteller role. So parents end up with a stack of cards based on their response to these activities. And then they count their cards, and if they have majority of cards are blue, they're probably a helper. So then they learn what that is. There's a handout that we share with them that explains what a helper does and what helpers generally do, or the rebel or the advocate or the organizer or the storyteller. And so they're starting to see that everybody has gifts, everybody's got talents, and that we need all of our potential and our interests and our strengths to make change. And the second part of session 3 is then a speed dating game where they get paired up for a few minutes with another parent. They share the change maker role that they picked, and then they move on to another parent. And so they're sharing and engaging in some discussion questions related to that change maker activity and how they might begin to imagine themselves fighting for a particular issue that they have been talking about in session 1, 2, and 3. So that's session 3. And then session 4 is the final session. So this is where it kind of all comes together. In session 4, parents begin to think about how we might fight for change. And they start with an activity. It's a Parent Nation bingo that we created. And through this game, they're learning about historical efforts, all that align to supporting parents, policies perhaps, or investments that were made. They'll learn about key concepts like neuroplasticity or toxic stress. They also will learn about a number of parent advocacy groups, about parent leaders that have made change in the world, all really to help build their confidence that they're not alone. There are all these organizations, there are all these historical moments that we can build on. And then that takes us to the second half of session 4, which is when parents begin to create their own Parent Village action plan. They have a poster with a number of questions and Post-it notes where they begin to answer questions like, what do we want to fight for? Who are our potential allies? How can we begin our change effort agenda? It's just the beginning of a conversation that we hope they will want to continue after their last session in session 4. And then finally, session 4 ends with parents taking the Parent Nation Pledge. So on one side of there's a card, a 2-sided card. On one side of the card, parents will write down their ideal parent nation, which they've been thinking about since session 1. In session 1, when they see that video about Parent Nation, the host or the facilitator encourages them to think about throughout the next several weeks that they'll be together, to think about what in their mind is an ideal parent nation. So now they have an opportunity to share that. They'll put it on their card, they'll share it with the group. And then on the other side of the card, they'll write what they're willing to do to fight for that ideal society. And we know parents are busy. We know a lot, especially if you have young children. And so it might be just how you think about the next person you vote for. Or the conversations that you have with your neighbors or your family members or your colleagues at church or at work. There are many ways, big and small, that we want parents to know they can be part of a change agenda on behalf of their children, on behalf of themselves, as the most influential people in the lives of their children. So that's the Parent Village idea. We launched on April 26th. The materials all became available early last week. They're on our website. You can go and download all the information. Again, at no cost. You can get the materials printed wherever you want. Or we are just about to launch our partnership with FedEx. They can print all the materials for you. There's going to be an online portal with the Parent Nation link to print all the materials. You can order the whole kit, or you can order a la carte, depending on what you want. And if you're within a 30-mile radius of that FedEx, they'll ship it to you for free. Again, that's a choice. You can print this in your organization if you're part of an organization, or go to your own printer, but the concepts, the idea, the curriculum is all no cost. All right, so those are the 4 sessions. If you could skip to the second to this last slide with all the photos page. I just want to call out that for the development of this toolkit, this parent activation toolkit, we started by talking to parents, and throughout the entire 9 to 12 months that we were in development, we were engaging parents, we were talking to parent leaders, but we also beta tested. Once we had all 4 sessions and we thought we were ready to go and test it all, we engaged 5 organizations across the country that hosted parent villages and went through the entire 4 sessions. And all of that feedback made its way to us so that we could improve on it. And that was sort of the work we were doing in February and March. And here are photos of these 5 groups. Actually, there's 6 because there's also the Parents as Teachers Conference, which is where we started back in October. We took the activities to a group there, tested some of the activities, got a lot of good feedback. The other 5 groups, 3 of them were virtual. So they tested all the virtual tools and the way in which we could bring this experience to parents online. We learned how to make it easier after our first shot because we know, there's a lot going on in these activities. And we also know that many parents, all they have is a phone. So we really learned from this how to make all that technology more accessible and possible to engage parents virtually. Of course, it's never the same. In person is always better, but it worked, and parents got a lot out of the engagement. The other two groups were in person. One was in a couple who was expecting their first baby in their backyard with coworkers and friends. You see that at the top with that red lawn chair. And then another in-person, the other in-person was in Arizona statewide through the Family Engagement Center, a statewide group that brought parents together. Most of that session was all in Spanish. The rest of them were in Spanish, or in English rather. And then the bottom corner is an all fathers group. So really we tried very hard to engage parents from all walks of life. We had mothers, fathers, grandparents, foster parents, caregivers. We had African-American, Latino, Asian, South Asian, middle income, low income, and all of that feedback made its way into the curriculum. And then the last slide I'll show you, just so that you see in your mind how the big shift activity generally works out. These are the Post-it notes that I talked about. This is that scale and the balance, and you'll see on the left, this is where parents in their lived reality, most of the responsibility and the weight of rearing children is mostly on parents, caregiver, their neighbors, friends. And the way that parents begin to think about this shift is, so then the discussion really is where there is incredible power, because parents are starting to talk about just how much more time they need for their children, and the importance of taking care of their mental health to be fully there for their children. And so that support that they need externally is to help them become the best parent they can be, putting into practice the 3 T's and all of what we have been sharing with parents and caregivers about brain development and the ways in which executive function skills are important and that they could play a role. Parents want to do all that. They so want to do all that. All parents want their children to succeed, but we have got to create the conditions in this country for that to happen. And that's why this platform for change called Building a Parent Nation. There's lots of ways for you to get in contact with us. If you move back up to the follow us slide, and I'm going to end here. You can contact us through Twitter, our website, Instagram, Facebook. But more importantly, just reach out directly to us. We can also add, I'll put in the chat or maybe Paige, you can help me put in the chat our direct email for Parent Villages. If you're interested in hosting a Parent Village or want to know more about the material, reach out to us anytime. We are eager to have as many partners as possible. Okay, I know that was a lot. I'm going to stop here, Tanya. I'm going to turn it back to you. Happy to engage in a conversation with all of you.
Thank you so much, Yoli and Dr. Suskind. This was such a great deep dive. Well, it was just the skim of the surface of a deep dive of what I think will be a really interesting and what I hope fruitful way for parents to begin thinking about in a constructive manner what they're doing, how they're doing it, and to make connections to a village so that they can think critically about what our family needs, what their children need, and how society and other parents can help. I have one question from Ramona Richards, who asks, who do you imagine hosting these parent villages? That's question 1. And 2, what other supports are available for the hosts beyond materials?
So we have big ideas for who can host a parent village. First of all, it could be any individual. We developed the tools in a way that were as accessible as possible. In fact, one of the big pieces of feedback we got was to make sure that in terms of language, it was accessible, not highly academic. It's in an 8th grade level reading. So really anyone, but we are going to count on partners around the country that already work with parents, that already do parent education, parent leadership, parent advocacy, and who would want to bring this toolkit into their own toolbox of other supports that they have for parents. So for example, National Head Start Association. Head Starts are across the country and they have a big focus on parent leadership. Or National PTA, or 0 to 3, or Parents as Teachers, Home Visitors, Parents as Teachers is eager to get all of this material into their 1,000 affiliates that already work with parents and can bring this to them. And then, you know, there are statewide family engagement centers. There are children's museums. There are community organizations that are fighting for community change with a lens on children and families. There are mayors. I mean, there are employers. So we are going to tap every potential partner, public, private, across sectors, that care about the future of this country, that care about our democracy, that care about the kind of social change this can bring. That is where we all should start if we are truly invested in the kind of society that we want across the board on all issues. So that's, I hope that answered your question, Ramona. And then what supports do we have available for the host? So we have all the materials, as you said. We've been making ourselves available for an even deeper dive. If you want to host a village, we're in the process of developing some training videos. But in the meantime, me and my team are happy to schedule some sessions, and we're having ongoing information sessions to go even deeper on how you might want to recruit parents, some best practices to deliver the curriculum from what we've learned from the beta test groups, et cetera. So, and then, you know, we want to hear from folks that are looking at the material, but more importantly, are hosting villages, and be responsive to you. If you have a question, if you have an issue, we'll be responsive to you and helping you resolve or just get clear about something you might not be clear about. So Dana, is there anything else that you would add?
No.
Ramona Richards also says it would be great to see a map or a schedule of parent villages happening near me. For example, so I don't start one if there's already one organized nearby.
Yeah, we just a few days ago opened up the portal to access the information, and we know there are 357 people that have accessed the toolkit. So we will be doing some follow-up. Some people might just want to look at the information, aren't ready to host. Some might be ready to host. We have some that started last week. So as we begin to see some growth, we will be mapping and sharing that. But, you know, I would say there are millions of parents. Even if somebody is doing a parent village, remember, these are small groups, 8 to 10. So even if you're already bringing together a small group of parents, another person in that same community can bring another group of parents together. So it's really about amplifying this. Imagine if we had thousands of people involved in parent villages across this country, we would get to the AARP model that Dana talked about.
I think what's very interesting is I think that a lot of parents might not know that they have some villages already set up. I know that in my community, we have a parent village, and I think I might formalize it a little bit using a lot of your materials. Are there any other questions?
We would love that.
All right, I'm not seeing anything in the chat. Anyone can pipe in if they want to by turning off their you don't need to turn on your camera, but turn off your mute, and you can pipe in.
Yeah, and if any of you have suggestions, you know, we had this wonderful conversation with a colleague about bringing parent villages to laundromats. So how might we think about this? You know, you guys are a model children's museum, but if there was an opportunity to bring this to the children's museums, how might we want to think about that so that it fits within, you know, the mission and the way in which you already engage parents? There might be ways that we haven't thought about or that would fit nicely into your existing programming.
Well, one quick thing for me, Dr. Suskind, one of the things that was just an eye opener for me was the Aarp model, and seeing and using that as a model to structure what a parent nation conversation would be. Tell me a little bit more about your aha moment, about how that came to be.
Yeah, no, you know, I started writing this book. It was almost a continuation of my first book, right? The first book really looks at the neuroscience and how we can understand what we need to do at the individual level, what parents and caregivers, et cetera. And this book came about from seeing all these barriers placed in the way of so many of the families, not only that we work with, but are often us, right? And so I was like, okay, I'm going to write this book that really imagines what does a society look like that puts children and families and their healthy brain development at the center. And as I was writing, it was just so clear that not only do we have this powerful science showing how important, you know, these early years are, how we need to better support parents and caregivers, we have this economic case, we have every case in the book. And I was like, you know, what is preventing us from moving forward? And in that way, what other stories or examples can I use from the past that could be potential, you know, lights of hope? Because the last thing we need is more obvious, oh yeah, there's a problem and we need to do something about it. And I just find I'm at this point, I feel like a true AARP expert. You can ask me anything. I literally know everything about it. It is the most incredible organization. And you know it's incredible when both, you know, it's been attacked by both Democrats and Republicans in the past, because they are so effective at doing what they set out to do, which is support the elderly, and in a good, you know, in a good way. This is not anything about like they're doing anything that shouldn't be done. The elderly have contributed much to our country, but what is so clear is that nobody is speaking for parents and caregivers, right? Everybody knows there's a problem. It's all over the internet. We know what needs to be done at a high level, but we just don't seem to be, we seem stuck. I mean, and I've come to the conclusion that this is about, I don't want to say the only way, but one of the few ways that I could see going forward. So.
Thank you for that. Well, I don't see any more questions. I want to thank both Dr. Suskind and Yuri Flores for this wonderful, wonderful conversation to get us really thinking about what we're doing and how we're doing it, and to focus our attention, as we do every day, on the wants and needs of our littles, but to really think about the wants and needs for the parents that support and create the best lives for our littles. So using science as well as social sciences, thank you so much for making the best use of this morning's time. And I hope that everyone thinks about how they too can begin engaging in a parent village. You have a village whether you know it or not, or you need a village whether you know it or not. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.